The Buddha Sāsana is where your mind will ultimately find what it has always been looking for. Often I have shared this story with you, but I will repeat it for the benefit of all. Not much a story, but really a fact. None of you have ever wanted any of the material things that you have worked so hard in your life to acquire. You have to admit by this point that that is true. Once again, none of you have ever really wanted all these material gains and possessions that you have worked your whole life so hard to acquire, because it was not really those material things that you actually wanted. It was what you thought they would offer you. And that is just one word, and that is happiness. Happiness is what you always wanted. To be free of suffering, in other words. These two things are almost synonymous. To be free of suffering was what you always wanted. But your mind kept telling you, because of the indoctrinations that you had from people around you, what society taught you, what your teachers taught you, what you read in the books, what you saw on the magazines, read on the magazines, watched on TV, that there are things out there that would bring you happiness. And then once the mind believed in that, your mind went on to work hard to acquire those things. Today, you work hard, you do a job to earn money so that you can buy the things that you believe make you happy. See, we have this saying amongst us, don't we? That I have found my happiness in something and others have found their happiness in something else. Right? You could say, for example, I find my happiness in eating chocolate. She finds her happiness in eating cake. I find my happiness in jazz music. She finds hers in classical music. And someone else finds theirs in rock music. I find my happiness in fashion. Others find their happiness in adventure. Lots of different things we talk about. And we really believe that these things actually make us happy. And if I asked you what your hobby was, pretty much everyone in this room would have an answer. Is there anyone in this room who doesn't have an answer to that question? A hobby, what is your hobby? If not now, at least you would have had earlier on in your life. Perhaps today you're too embarrassed to answer that question even. But I myself, I had hobbies. I was fascinated by stamps and I used to collect them as a young kid. I was fascinated by coins and notes. I used to collect those things. Another one of my hobbies was music. These were some of the hobbies that I used to have as a kid, because apparently we all have to have a hobby. I never stopped to ask the question, why is it that people need to have hobbies? But I remember in my younger years at school, they used to ask, your teachers would ask you, right? What's your hobby, Buddha? I was like, what? What's your hobby? A hobby? Should I have one? Yes. Well, that made me feel very inadequate. Everyone had a hobby and I didn't. So I figured I had to pick up a hobby. So then I went around asking people what their hobbies were. And then people said that there were all these things you could do as a hobby. You could play the guitar, you could listen to music, you could art, craft, Scrabble, Monopoly, hobbies, chess, things that people could do when they were bored, things that people could do to find happiness, to a sense of fulfillment within themselves. I never stopped to ponder why it was that people had to do something to be happy. See, always skipped a beat. Always missed that. It was the norm that we have always had to do something to be happy, wasn't it? Even today, if someone asks you, what do you do to be happy? That question doesn't sound wrong, does it? But did you know that the question was fundamentally wrong? If someone asked you today, what do you do to be happy? That question doesn't seem wrong. It seems to be a perfectly valid question. Someone asks you, what do you do in the weekend? Generally, in other words, what they're saying is, what do you do to have fun? Someone asks you, what would you like to do this weekend? In other words, again, they're asking, what would you like to do to have fun? What do you do for fun? These questions today seem absurd to me, really. The very fact that we actually have these questions in our vocabulary and we talk about these things when we greet and meet people. When you get to know someone, you exchange your name, right, where they live, what they do, their profession, and after a while, pretty soon you're going to have to ask them, so, what are your interests? What are your interests? Today, that's such a funny question to me. What are your interests? What are your hobbies? What do you do for a kick? What floats your boat? What's your cup of tea? How do you like your tea? With or without sugar? All of these were indoctrinations. Your mind had no answers to any of these questions when it was first born. Did you know that? You were not born with a favorite color. It was acquired. And today, it seems so natural and so normal for you to have a favorite color. You probably still have one. But you had to be taught what your favorite color was. If so, how could that be your favorite color? In other words, any color could have been indoctrinated in your mind as your favorite color. Any color whatsoever. If the right mental environmental conditions were created, you could have been fed anything. Now take food, for instance. In our culture, there are certain foods that we eat, don't we? There are staple foods like rice and curry. Yeah? But if you go to another part of the world, they're also human beings, aren't they? In other parts of the world, they'll eat other kinds of food. So, some people actually enjoy that. They keep traveling around the world so that they can try out different foods. And that's part of again, it's another hobby for some people. But do you think that we are predisposed to eating or enjoying a certain kind of food when we are born? Do you think we are born that way? Like you're born to eat pizza. You're born to eat rice and curry. You're born to eat pasta or whatever. That is not so, ladies and gentlemen. We are not born with a predisposition for any type of food as a favorite kind of food. It's not how that works. Your mind is not born to have a favorite kind of food. Here's what your mind is born with: a predisposition for happiness. That's all. In fact, that was why it was born in the first place. It never found it last time, the previous time. So it's come back to complete unfinished business.